The night was still, but her heart was anything but calm. Every sound of the wind through the trees made her turn her head, hoping, wishing, praying that what she longed for was finally true. For 3 endless years, she had carried the weight of absence like a stone in her chest. 3 years of wondering if he was alive or gone forever. 3 years of waiting for a shadow to return from a place most never came back from. And now, standing in the faint glow of the moon, she whispered through trembling lips, "Don't go. I've waited 3 years for you," as her Apache warrior stepped out of the darkness. Looking like he had just walked back from the fires of hell itself, his figure was leaner, harsher, marked by scars that told stories she could never fully know. His eyes, once warm with the fire of youth, now carried something else, something heavy, something shaped by loss, pain, and survival. Yet, beneath the hardened shell, she recognized him. The man who once laughed in the open fields, who promised her he would return, who swore that no matter how long the night stretched, dawn would come. And now dawn stood before her. But it wasn't the kind of light she expected. For years, whispers had haunted her. People said he was gone, that no one could endure what he had endured. Some told her to forget, to move on, to let the memory of him fade like dust in the wind. But she never listened. In her heart, she knew. Somehow, she knew he would return. Her love had been stronger than time, stronger than distance, stronger than despair. And tonight, as the fire crackled low and the stars shimmered above, her faith was no longer just faith. It was reality. Yet even as her eyes filled with tears of relief, her hands shook, because something about him felt different. He didn't move toward her at first. He just stood there, breathing slowly, as if relearning how to stand on familiar ground. His clothes were torn, his skin darkened by smoke and ash, and his silence was louder than any scream. She wanted to run to him, to wrap her arms around him and never let go, but something about his stillness held her back. What had he seen? What had he lived through in that abyss he had come from? When he finally stepped closer, she saw it clearly, the fire in his eyes. Not the playful fire she remembered, but a fire born from survival, from fighting battles most could never imagine. He had returned from places where hope was a stranger, where shadows ruled, where every breath was stolen rather than given. And as much as she wanted to believe everything was as it had been before, she knew life had carved him into someone new. Her voice trembled when she spoke again. "I thought I lost you." His jaw tightened, and for a moment it looked like he wanted to speak, but no words came. He only lifted his hand slowly, as though it weighed more than stone, and let it hover near her cheek. She leaned into it, closing her eyes, feeling the roughness of his skin against hers. And in that single touch, all the years of waiting, the lonely nights, the whispered prayers, came rushing back. But with that closeness came a new fear. Because now that he was here, now that he had returned, what if he left again? What if the hell he had escaped still clung to him, still called his name, still threatened to pull him back? The world around them seemed to hold its breath. The trees stood still, the night birds were silent, and even the wind seemed to pause, as though the earth itself wanted to hear what would happen next. Her tears glistened in the moonlight, falling softly down her face, while his eyes searched hers, like a man caught between two worlds, one of the living, and one he had barely escaped. "You came back to me," she whispered, her words fragile but filled with desperate hope. "Don't go again. Please, don't go." But he didn't answer right away. He only looked at her, his silence heavy with secrets. Secrets of battles fought, of nights where he clung to life by the edge of a blade, so the voices that may still follow him in the quiet hours of dawn. She felt that his presence was real, yet part of him still lingered in the darkness he had come from. For a heartbeat they stood there, caught between reunion and loss, love and fear. Her arms ached to hold him, but her spirit trembled, uncertain if the man before her was truly hers or only a shadow of who he once had been. The fire crackled low, sparks rising and fading into the sky, like memories drifting into the night. She wanted to believe that this was their moment, that their suffering had ended, that love had conquered time and torment. But deep inside, she knew the story was far from finished. His scars were not just on his body, they lived in his silence, in the darkness behind his eyes, in the way he carried himself like a man who had fought not only others, but himself. And so she held her breath, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to give her a promise she could hold on to, waiting for him to tell her he was here to stay. But the only sound was the beat of her heart and the faint rustle of the night. His lips parted as though to say something, but then he closed them again, his eyes flickering with a storm she couldn't read. Her tears fell faster, her voice breaking as she reached for him again. "Don't go. Not again. I can't lose you twice." He lowered his gaze, his shadow long against the ground, and for a moment she thought she saw his hands tremble. What haunted him? What truth did he carry? And would love be enough to keep him from being pulled back into the darkness that had nearly claimed him? The night did not answer, and neither did he. The silence stretched, sharp and fragile, like the space between lightning and thunder. And as she waited, heart in her throat, she realized the hardest part was not the 3 years she had spent waiting, but the question of what came next. Now that he had returned, the story had only just begun, and the answer she longed for was still hidden in the shadows of his silence. The silence between them stretched like a canyon, deep and wide, filled with things unsaid. She searched his eyes, hoping to find the man she once knew, hiding beneath the scars and shadows. But what she saw was harder to understand. His gaze flickered like a flame caught in the wind there one moment, dimmed the next. He opened his mouth again, as if to speak, then shut it tight. His lips pressed into a line that told her he was holding back more than just words. She wanted to fill the silence, to ease the weight pressing down on them, but the questions in her heart tangled together. Where had he been? What had kept him from her all these years? Why had he returned looking like he carried the ashes of the underworld on his shoulders? Her chest ached with the need to know, yet she feared the answers as much as she longed for them. The fire popped, small spark leaping into the night, breaking the stillness for a moment. He shifted slightly, his shoulders rolling back as if his body remembered old battles. She noticed the marks across his arms, long and jagged, healed but raw in their story. Each scar was a sentence in a language she could not read, carved into him by hands she would never know. Finally, his voice came, low and rough, like stone scraping against stone. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Her heart jumped at the sound of his voice after so long. It was familiar and yet changed. The warmth that once lingered in his tone was hidden beneath layers of pain. She leaned closer, urging him silently to go on, but he stopped there, shaking his head slightly as if even those few words had cost him something. She tried to steady her voice, though it trembled. "Then tell me, please." "I've waited for you. I need to know." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the conflict in him, love mixed with fear, longing tangled with guilt. His eyes glistened in the firelight, but no tears fell. Instead, he glanced away, his gaze fixed on the horizon as though something out there in the dark was watching him, pulling him back. "I was taken," he said finally, his words slow, each one heavy. "Not just from this place, not just from you, but from myself." She frowned, not fully understanding, but her chest tightened with dread. His voice carried weight, as though the memories he spoke of were chains still clinging to him. He did not explain further, and she didn't push, sensing that what he carried could not be spoken all at once. Instead, she reached for his hand. His fingers were cold despite the fire, and she squeezed them gently, hoping her touch would remind him of where he was now, here, with her, alive. He didn't pull away, but he didn't return the squeeze either. He only sat there, staring into the flames as though they mirrored the battles he had fought in some hidden realm. The night stretched on, and though she longed for answers, she began to realize that the truth might come slowly, in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror. And yet, in her heart, she held on to the hope that love could piece him back together again, as the fire dimmed. Her thoughts drifted back to the years she had waited. She remembered the nights spent alone, listening to the wind howl through the canyon, wondering if it carried his voice. She remembered the stories told by others, some claiming he had been killed in battle, others saying he had simply abandoned her, but she had never believed them. Her love had been unshaken, though loneliness had gnawed at her soul. And now, here he was, returned from somewhere no one could name. It should have been enough, but it wasn't, because he was here in body, yet part of him was still lost. She finally asked the question that had burned in her mind since the moment she saw him. Why now? After all this time, why come back? He turned to her slowly, his jaw tightening again, as though the answer was a secret guarded by fire and blood. His eyes softened for a moment, but the pain behind them never left. Because I couldn't stay there any longer, he said. His words gave her no comfort. They were too vague, too haunted. She wanted to ask where there was, what it meant, but the weight in his tone stopped her. She feared that if he told her everything, she might not be able to bear it. The air grew colder, and the stars seemed sharper above them. She drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her eyes never leaving his face. He looked like a man who had carried the world on his back, yet she sensed that the world he had carried was not the same one she had lived in. At last, she spoke softly, almost afraid of her own words. I don't care what you've been through. You're here now. That's all that matters. He shook his head, his eyes hardening again. No, it's not all that matters. What follows me? It doesn't end just because I left it behind. Her breath caught, her heart racing. His words were like shadows slipping into her chest, cold and uncertain. She wanted to believe he was safe now, that whatever had haunted him had been left far away, but his voice carried a truth she couldn't deny. What do you mean? She whispered. He didn't answer. He only leaned back, his eyes scanning the darkness around them, as though expecting something to emerge from the trees. His hand twitched near the knife at his side, and she realized he hadn't come back as just a man. He had returned as a warrior still at war. Even if the battlefield was unseen, she swallowed hard, her mind racing with questions she dared not ask. The silence between them grew heavier, filled with the weight of what was unsaid. And though she longed to bridge it, she knew some truths could not be forced. They had to be given piece by piece when the time was right. The fire crackled again, flames casting long shadows across his face. For a moment he looked like the boy she had loved, the one who had promised her forever. But then the shadows shifted, and she saw the man forged in pain. Shaped by battles she couldn't imagine, her heart ached. Torn between the joy of having him near and the fear of losing him again, not to distance, but to the darkness that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. She wanted to tell him that love could heal, that time could mend even the deepest wounds. But the words caught in her throat, because she wasn't sure if he believed that anymore. So she sat in silence, watching him, waiting for the moment when he would trust her with his truth. And as the night deepened and the fire burned lower, she realized their story was only beginning. The years of waiting had been long, but the journey ahead, the battle for his soul. For their love would be longer still, and in that quiet. She wondered if love alone would be enough to keep him from slipping back into the shadows. He had barely escaped. The fire burned lower, shadows stretching long and strange across the ground. She could feel the weight of his silence pressing on her, heavier than the years she had spent alone. His return should have brought peace, but instead it had opened a door to something darker, something she wasn't sure either of them was ready to face. He looked like a man standing between two worlds, one hand reaching toward her, the other still gripped tightly by whatever place had kept him prisoner all this time. In the distance, a coyote called, its cry thin and haunting under the wide night sky. She shivered, though the fire's warmth brushed against her skin. His hand twitched near the knife at his belt again, and she realized this wasn't just the reflex of a warrior. He was expecting something, or someone. The fear that crept into her chest wasn't just for him now. It was for herself, for them. It's for whatever invisible shadow he had dragged back into their lives. You're not safe here, he said at last, most low, almost a growl. Her heart skipped. Safe? From what? His eyes darted to the trees, scanning the darkness as though he could see what she could not. It doesn't end just because I left. The past doesn't let go so easily. His words sent a chill through her. She wanted to demand answers, but part of her already knew he wouldn't give them freely. He carried secrets like weapons, sharp and hidden. If he revealed them too quickly, they might cut her as deeply as they had cut him. Still, she couldn't stay silent. "You've been gone 3 years? Do you think fear will keep me from you now? I've lived with fear every day since you disappeared. Tell me what haunts you." He turned to her then, and the look in his eyes was so fierce it made her catch her breath. Yet beneath the hardness, there was something else: regret. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing hers. But before she could close her hand over his, he pulled away. "You don't want to know," he muttered. She felt her chest tighten, frustration mixing with sorrow. "I waited, and I prayed, and I endured every whisper that told me to forget you. And now you stand before me, but you shut me out like I'm a stranger. How can I fight what I can't see?" He flinched at her words, his jaw clenched. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was so thick, it felt like another presence between them. Then, softly, he said, "Because if you see it, it'll follow you too." Her eyes widened, her breath quickening. His tone wasn't one of warning, it was one of certainty. Whatever had scarred him, whatever nightmares still clung to him, he believed they weren't just his burden. The thought unsettled her deeply, yet a part of her refused to be pushed aside. If she had waited all these years, she wouldn't let fear undo her now. But his silence left her space to remember her own suffering. 3 years of emptiness had carved wounds in her too. Nights staring at the horizon, hoping to see him walk out of the shadows. Days filled with whispers from those who pitied her, who told her love couldn't last that long. She had carried loneliness like armor, refusing to let the world break her. And now, seeing him back but so changed, she wondered if she had been strong for nothing, or if her strength was only beginning to be tested. She thought of the elders who spoke of the spirit world, of battles that stretched beyond what eyes could see. Some said that warriors who vanished weren't taken by men, but by forces older and darker. Looking at him now, she wondered if those stories had been warnings all along. He shifted suddenly, standing to his feet, his body tense. His eyes scanned the ridge beyond them, his shoulders squared as though ready for an attack. She rose too, her pulse quick. "What is it?" she whispered. He shook his head. "Not yet. But it's close." The way he said it made her skin crawl. She followed his gaze into the shadows, but all she saw were the outlines of trees and brush swaying gently in the night air. Nothing more. Yet his certainty made her chest ache. If he believed something was coming, she couldn't ignore it. The conflict grew sharper inside her. Was she to believe in what she could see, the man before her, scarred but alive? Or should she trust in what she felt, the darkness he carried, the warning in his voice? And then, as if the world itself wanted to test her resolve, the wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that wasn't the rustle of trees or the call of an animal. It was faint, distant, almost like chanting carried on the air. She froze, her eyes darting to him. His face hardened, his hand gripping the hilt of his knife. "It's starting," he whispered. Fear wrapped around her, cold and suffocating. She wanted to run, but she forced herself to stay. If he had fought through 3 years of torment to return to her, then she would stand beside him now, no matter what shadows approached. But in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. The true battle was not just against what hunted him, it was against the silence between them, the truths locked away in his scars. And the question of whether love could stand against whatever darkness followed him from hell itself. The night grew darker, the fire burning low, and with every flicker of flame, the distance between them felt both too small and impossibly vast. She wanted to reach for him again, but her hand shook. He wanted to speak. She could see it in his eyes. But the words died on his lips, and so they stood together in the shadows of the night. Two souls caught between love and fear, between reunion and loss, waiting for the storm that neither of them could yet name. The chanting on the wind grew clearer, rising and falling like the beat of a hidden drum. Her heart pounded in rhythm, each thud loud in her chest. She wanted to tell herself it was only the night playing tricks, that the sound was nothing but echoes in the canyon. But when she looked at him, at the way his jaw tightened and his hand gripped his, she knew it was real. He moved closer to her, his shadow long against the dying fire. His eyes never left the dark line of trees beyond them. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice rough, urgent. Fear clawed at her throat, but she obeyed. She pressed closer, her eyes scanning the night for shapes that would not reveal themselves. The air itself seemed heavier, filled with something unseen yet undeniable. The chanting swelled, joined by a low hum that made the earth tremble beneath their feet. She felt the vibration through her body, as though the ground itself was alive. Her fingers dug into his arm, searching for some anchor against the rising storm around them. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice a thin thread against the sound. He did not look at her, his gaze locked on the shadows. "Not who," he said. "What?" Her breath caught. His words carried no explanation, yet they told her more than she wanted to hear. This was no ordinary danger. The fire sputtered, its flame shrinking to a faint glow. Darkness pressed closer, thick and heavy. She thought she saw movement at the edge of the trees. Shapes that weren't formed of flesh but of smoke and shadow, shifting and twisting as though the night itself had come alive. He drew his knife, the blade catching what little light remained. For a moment, she saw the warrior she remembered, fierce and unyielding. But there was something else in him now, a weight of knowledge she couldn't share, a fear even he couldn't mask. "They followed me back," he said under his breath. Almost to himself, the words chilled her more than the night air. She wanted to ask what they wanted, why they had chosen him, but the questions froze on her tongue. The shapes in the trees grew clearer, their outlines sharper, as though they were no longer content to remain hidden. She could feel the tension in him, every muscle wound tight, ready for a fight he knew too well. Her own body trembled, but she refused to run. If she ran, she would lose him again, and this time there would be no hope of return. The chanting rose to a fever pitch, sound pressing against her ears until she thought she might scream. The shadows swayed in rhythm, moving closer, their presence undeniable now. Her heart hammered, each beat a desperate prayer that love could hold against the storm about to break. He turned to her then, his eyes burning in the dim light. "If anything happens," he said quickly, "don't follow. Don't call my name. Promise me." Tears stung her eyes, but she shook her head. "I can't promise that." He gripped her shoulders, his touch firm, almost desperate. "You must. If they hear your voice, if they know you—" He stopped, his words breaking, his breath ragged. Then he pushed her gently back, his knife raised again as the first of the shadows broke from the tree line. Her heart froze. The figures were taller now, darker, their forms rippling as if made from smoke and fire. They moved without sound, yet the chanting pulsed around them like a heartbeat that was not their own. The warrior stepped forward, his body a shield between her and the darkness. His presence was steady, but she could feel the storm raging inside him. This was the battle he had carried in silence, the war he had never spoken of. And now it had come for them both. The fire died completely, plunging the world into shadow. Only the glint of his blade and the burning eyes of the figures gave shape to the night. She held her breath, her body trembling. Her soul caught between love and terror. Everything in the air told her this was the moment before everything broke. The night held its breath with her, the world balanced on the edge of a blade. And though she longed for answers, for safety, for peace, she knew none would come now. The clash was about to begin. The first figure reached the circle of stones and the air seemed to strain, like the night itself was holding back a wave. He stepped forward to meet it, and for a breath she thought the world might split open between them. But then something shifted, so slight, she almost missed it. The chanting faltered, not from the shadows, but from within him, as if some old rhythm had lost its grip. He lowered his knife an inch and drew a slow breath. She watched his shoulders rise and fall, the way a person breathes when they finally stop running. He spoke without turning. "They don't want me to fight. They want me to forget." His voice was clear now, steady in a way it hadn't been since he returned. "They live on what we bury." The figures wavered, as if the truth had pushed a ripple through them. She didn't know what to do, but she knew the danger had changed shape. This was not a battle for blood. It was a battle for memory. She stepped closer, careful, the soft ground cool beneath her feet. "Then remember," she whispered. "Remember everything they tried to take." She reached out and placed her palm between his shoulder blades. His muscles were tense as a drawn bow, but under her touch, warmth moved like a small sun waking after a long winter. He lifted his head. "I left in anger," he said, speaking not to her and not to the shadows, but to the thin place between both. "I followed a promise of glory, and I lost friends, and I lost my name. When the dark pressed close, it told me I was nothing. It told me I had no home." He took another breath, but it lied. The chant rose again, louder, pressing against them like wind. The shadows leaned in, taller, almost towering. She felt fear rush into her throat. "Tell them what you are," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "Tell them what you kept," he straightened. "I kept love. Something broke not in the world, but inside the wall that had held him." He slid the knife back into its sheath. The movement was slow, deliberate, a refusal that filled the space between heartbeat and word. The figures halted, as if they needed the blade to make sense of him. Without it raised, they couldn't find their shape. He turned to her, just enough that she could see his face. The hard lines were still there, but the cold behind his eyes had softened. He looked like a man who had crossed a desert and finally tasted water. "I kept you," he said. The chant thinned like smoke in rain. When she looked back at the tree line, the figures were still there, but smaller now. Like the distance had expanded even though they had not moved. A tremor ran through the ground, and then quiet spread outward, slow and calm. "What are they?" she asked, because the question had to live somewhere other than her chest. He shook his head once. "Pieces, echoes. Every step I took alone gathered them. Every time I shut you out, they fed." He looked at the circle of stones by the dead fire. "They can't cross where truth stands." She opened her mouth to answer. But a soft light rose on the horizon, not sunrise, not dawn, just a pale glow like the night was loosening its hold. In that thin light, the shapes near the trees looked less like beings and more like shadows cast by nothing. She realized then that fear had given them form, and love spoken out loud. Not held tight and silent was the one thing they couldn't grasp. He reached for her hand. This time he didn't pull away. Their fingers met and settled together in the easiest way, like they had always known where to fit. She felt a tremble go through him and then stillness after. No chant. No hum. Only their breathing and the far-off rustle of leaves. When the quiet had held long enough to feel real, he sat by the stones and rebuilt the fire. He showed her how to stack the branches so the flame could find air, how to feed it without smothering it. The small tasks felt like a kind of prayer. When the fire caught, orange light spilled over their faces and warmed the cold places night had left behind. He began to tell her the story he had carried like a thorn, not all at once, not like a confession, but like a river that found its channel and finally moved. He spoke of the first months after he left, of a trail that promised honor and brought only silence. He spoke of the desert sky wide as forever, and the nights when he counted stars just to remember numbers. He told her about the voice that grew in him, one that sounded like his own but stripped of hope, urging him to keep going farther until all paths back were lost. He spoke of a place he called hell, though it had no gates and no fires only, the emptiness that thrives when a person forgets their name. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fix the story or soften it. She let it live as he gave it, and the more he spoke, the more the tightness in her chest unwound. Because even the worst parts had edges that let light through when he said them out loud. The unsaid had kept him there. The said brought him back. When he paused to stir the embers, she told him her story too. She told him how each season had laid its own kind of waiting in her bones. How the river taught her patience, rising and falling as if to say, all things return. She told him about the people who told her to move on, and how she tried to be kind even when their words cut. She told him about the nights she slept near the door, not to leave quickly, but to open fast if he came knocking. She told him about the day she almost gave up, and the tiny sign that stopped her. hawks circling the same patch of sky 3 times. A small feather on the step, the feeling that love had not finished its work. He listened without looking away. In his eyes she saw what she needed. Not pity, not guilt, but presence. The story wasn't a weight between them anymore. It was a bridge. The first light of true morning crept across the ridge. The trees wore thin bands of gold, and the fire burned steady. He stood and faced the tree line. Nothing moved there now but wind. He bowed his head once. A simple gesture that felt like closure, the kind a person offers the past when it has finally released its hold. "Will they come back?" she asked, because truth doesn't vanish in one night. "They might try," he said, "but now they'll find us together." They dismantled the circle of stones and rebuilt it a few steps closer to the home she had kept. It felt like a small thing, but it meant everything. The center of their life moved from fear to door, from border to hearth. He washed the ash from his hands in a basin by the step. She did too. The water clouded and then cleared when they poured it onto the thirsty ground. In the days that followed, he spoke with the elders, not for permission, but for wisdom. They listened and nodded and named the shadows for what they were, leftovers of grief. Hunger for power, the long echo of anger. One elder said, "When you forget your people, the night gives you new ones. They are always hungry." Another said, "Make your mornings long. Speak light before you eat." He took their words like tools and put them where he could reach them. Together. They made small rituals that mattered. A line of white stones by the threshold to mark the place where they would not bring lies. A bundle of sage and pine hung near the door, not as a charm against monsters, but as a promise to breathe and begin again. Each night, they told one hard truth and one good memory. Each morning, they chose one thing to build. The world did not change all at once, but it became livable in a way that felt like a new kind of bravery. People in the village came by, some with baskets, some with questions. A few brought doubt. Most brought warmth. She answered gently, and he did too. And soon the tone of the whispers shifted from pity to respect, from gossip to story. Children asked him about the places he had seen. He didn't hide the hard parts, but he didn't feed fear. He told them what he had learned, that strength without love is a road that leads nowhere. That courage is not the knife you raise, but the truth you speak. That coming home is the bravest step a warrior makes. On a soft evening, weeks later, they walked to the ridge where she used to stand alone and search the horizon. The land spread out before them, wide and calm. The wind moved through the grass like a hand smoothing a wrinkled cloth. He squeezed her fingers, and she felt the warmth of a future that didn't need to be louder than this moment. "Do you regret it?" she asked, not to reopen wounds, but to honor the path. He took his time before answering. "I regret the silence," he said. "I don't regret the scars. They remind me to listen." Then he added, "I thought hell was a place I had to escape. Now, I know it's a story that ends when you tell the truth." She leaned into him, and they watched the sun lay itself down behind the far hills. The sky glowed with colors that would be gone in minutes, and that made them more precious, not less. She thought of all the hours she had counted, all the prayers she had whispered, and how the answer had arrived, not as thunder, but as a man choosing to stay, later, by their door. He paused and looked back toward the trees. "Thank you for waiting," he said. "For keeping the light." "I didn't keep it," she said, with a smile that reached the tired places in her. "We kept it. Even when we were apart," he nodded, and that small agreement felt like the last knot loosening. Inside, the hearth glowed. The room held the simple things that make a life: a pot, a blanket, a carved bowl. He set his knife above the door where tools belong when they're not needed. She set 2 cups by the fire and poured warm tea. Steam rose in thin, curling lines that faded into the air. They ate. They spoke. They fell quiet in the comfortable way people do when silence no longer threatens. The night came easy and left no shadows on the floor. Before sleep, she asked him for one promise, and he gave it freely. "If the dark calls again," she said, "don't go alone." Take my voice with you. I will, he answered. And if it calls you, I'll answer first. They lay down facing each other. The world outside kept its gentle sounds. Crickets, wind, the soft burn of the hearth. He closed his eyes without flinching. She followed. The next morning, the first thing they did was speak light. They said each other's names like blessings. They named their home. They named the work of the day. And when they stepped out beneath the clear sky, they did not look for shadows. They looked for the path that leads forward. For those who hear their story, the return from hell. The Apache warrior who found his way back. The woman who waited. The love that outlasted fear. The lesson is simple and steady. Survival is not the end. Redemption begins when you stop running. Healing grows where truth is spoken, where community stands near, where a door stays open and a light burns through the long night. And if the wind ever carries a chant from the trees, remember what breaks it, not the blade, but the name you keep and the love you refuse to bury in the end. The figures at the edge of the woods never fully vanished. They thinned until they were only what they had always been, shadows, with nothing solid to cling to. When the two of them walked the path by the river, the water said what it always says to those who listen: all things return, and all things can be made new. Their story closed not with thunder, but with a quiet promise kept, and that was enough.